process the disappointment, but then I try to focus on what did I learn from this that can make me a better person in the future. And there's usually something to be learned when I fail. And I think we should all ask ourselves, what can we learn from the pandemic about how we can do better in the future? And you mentioned there a really good lesson. You know, we were not as resilient as we thought we were. And we're not as prepared, maybe, as we wish we were. You can even see very stark contrast around the planet. South Korea, they have over 50 million people. Do you know how many deaths they have from COVID last time I checked?
No.
It's about 500. You know, why is that? Well, the short answer is that they had prepared. They were incredibly quick.
Victory awaits.
Incredibly quick to get on it with very rapid testing and contact tracing and so on, which is why they never had more cases than they could contact trace effectively, right? They never even had to have the kind of big lockdowns we had in the West. But the deeper answer to it's not just the Koreans are just somehow better people. The reason I think they were better prepared was because they had already had a pretty bad hit from the SARS pandemic, or which never became a pandemic, something like 17 years ago, I think. So it's kind of fresh memory that, you know, we need to be prepared for pandemics. So they were, right?
Moving.
And so maybe this is a lesson here for all of us to draw from COVID, that rather than just wait for the next pandemic or the next problem with AI getting out of control or anything else, maybe we should just actually set aside a tiny fraction of our GDP to have people very systematically do some horizon scanning and say, okay, what are the things that could go wrong? And let's duke it out and see which are the more likely ones and which are the ones that are actually actionable, and then be prepared.
So one of the observations as one little ant/human that I am of disappointment is the political division over information that has been observed, that I observed this year. That it seemed the discussion was less about
The hammer's gonna fall.
sort of what happened and understanding what happened deeply, and more about there's different truths out there, and it's like an argument, my truth is better than your truth, and it's like red versus blue or different, like it was like this ridiculous discourse that doesn't seem to get at any kind of notion of the truth. It's not like some kind of scientific process. Even science got politicized in ways that's very heartbreaking to me. You have an exciting project on the AI front of trying to
step forward.
Rethink one of the, you mentioned corporations. There's one of the other collective intelligence systems that have emerged through all of this is social networks, and just the spread, the internet is the spread of information on the internet, our ability to share that information. There's all different kinds of news sources and so on. And so you said, like, that's from first principles, let's rethink how we think about the news, how we think about information. Can you talk about this amazing effort that you're undertaking?
Oh, I'd love to. This has been my big COVID project. It's been nights and weekends on ever since the lockdown. To segue into this, actually, let me come back to what you said earlier, that you had this hope that in your experience, people who you felt were very talented, were often idealistic and wanted to do good. Frankly, I feel the same about all people, by and large. There are always exceptions, but I think the vast majority of everybody, regardless of education and whatnot, really are fundamentally good, right? So how can it be that people still do so much nasty stuff, right? I think it has everything to do with this, with the information that we're given.
Yes.
No, if you go into Sweden 500 years ago and you start telling all the farmers that those Danes in Denmark, they're so terrible people, you know, and we have to invade them because they've done all these terrible things that you can't fact check yourself. A lot of people, Swedes did that, right? We're seeing so much of this today in the world, both geopolitically, you know, where we are told that China is bad and Russia is bad and Venezuela is bad, and people in those countries are often told that we are bad. And we also see it at a micro level. where people are told that, oh, those who voted for the other party are bad people. It's not just an intellectual disagreement, but they're bad people. And we're getting ever more divided. And so how do you reconcile this with this intrinsic goodness in people? I think it's pretty obvious that it has, again, to do with the information that we're fed and given, right? We evolved to live in small groups where you might know 30 people in total, right? So you then had a system that was quite good for assessing who you could trust and who you could not. And if someone told you that, Joe there is a jerk, but you had interacted with him yourself and seen him in action, and you would quickly realize maybe that that's actually not quite accurate, right? But now that the most people on the planet are people we've never met, it's very important that we have a way of trusting the information we're given. And so where does the news project come in? Well, throughout history, you can go read Machiavelli, from the 1400s, and you'll see how already then they were busy manipulating people with propaganda and stuff. Propaganda is not new at all. And the incentives to manipulate people is just not new at all. What is it that's new? What's new is machine learning meets propaganda. That's what's new. That's why this has gotten so much worse. Some people like to blame certain individuals, like in my liberal university bubble, many people blame Donald Trump and say it was his fault. I see it differently. I think Donald Trump just had this extreme skill at playing this game in the machine learning algorithm age. A game he couldn't have played 10 years ago. So what's changed? What's changed is, well, Facebook and Google and other companies, and I'm not bad-mouthing them. I have a lot of friends who work for these companies, good people. They deployed machine learning algorithms just to increase their profit a little bit, to just maximize the time people spent watching ads. And they had totally underestimated how effective they were going to be. This was, again, the black box, non-intelligible intelligence. They just noticed, we're getting more ad revenue, great. It took a long time until they even realized why and how damaging this was for society. Because, of course, what the machine learning figured out was that the by far most effective way of gluing you to your little rectangle was to show you things that triggered strong emotions, anger, etc., resentment. And
the stink of that.
If it was true or not didn't really matter. It was also easier to find stories that weren't true if you weren't limited. That's just a limitation to show people.
That's a very limiting factor.
And before long, we got these amazing filter bubbles on a scale we had never seen before. Couple this to the fact that also the online news media were so effective that they killed a lot of print journalism. There's less than half as many journalists now in America, I believe, as there was, a generation ago. You just couldn't compete with the online advertising. So all of a sudden, most people are not even reading newspapers. They get their news from social media. And most people only get news in their little bubble. So along comes now some people like Donald Trump who figured out, among the first successful politicians to figure out how to really play this new game and become very, very influential. But I think Donald Trump was he took advantage of it. He didn't create the fundamental conditions were created by machine learning sort of taking over the news media. So this is what motivated my little COVID project here. So, I said before, machine learning and tech in general is not evil, but it's also not good. It's just a tool that you can use for good things or bad things. And as it happens, machine learning in news was mainly used by the big players, big tech, to manipulate people into watch as many ads as possible, which had this unintended consequence of really screwing up our democracy and fragmenting it into filter bubbles. So I thought, well, machine learning algorithms are basically free. They can run on your smartphone for free also if someone gives them away to you, right? There's no reason why they only have to help the big guy to manipulate the little guy. They can just as well help the little guy to see through all the manipulation attempts from the big guy. So this project is called, you can go to improvethenews.org. The first thing we've built is this little news aggregator. Looks a bit like Google News, except it has these sliders on it to help you break out of your filter bubble. So if you're reading, you can click and go to your favorite topic, and then if you just slide the left-right slider away all the way over to the left.
There's 2 sliders, right?
Yeah, there's the one. The most obvious one is the one that has left-right labeled on it. You go to the left, you get one set of articles. You go to the right, you see a very different truth appearing.
Oh, that's literally left and right on the
Political spectrum.
On the political.
Yeah, so if you're reading about immigration, for example, it's very, very noticeable.
That's progress.
Current is
And I think
powerful,
step one,
pulling
always,
at
if
the
you want
boat.
to not
Should
get
you leave,
manipulated,
you
is
will
just
not
to
be able to return to
be able to
Moonrise
recognize
Towers
the
this
techniques
way.
people use. So it's very helpful to just see how they spin things on the two sides. I think many people are under the misconception that the main problem is fake news. It's not. I had an amazing team of MIT students where we did an academic project that used machine learning to detect the main kinds of bias over the summer. And yes, of course, sometimes there's fake news where someone just claims something that's false.
I'm ready.
Right.
Whatever it takes.
Like, oh, Hillary Clinton just got divorced or something. But what we see much more of is actually just omissions.
These things have stayed
If you go
interesting.
to, there's some stories
Time to press ahead.
which just won't be mentioned by the left or the right because it doesn't suit their agenda. And then they'll instead mention other ones very, very, very much. So, for example, we've had a number of stories about the Trump family's financial dealings. And then there's been a bunch of stories about the Biden family's, Hunter Biden's financial dealings, right? Surprise, surprise, they don't get equal coverage on the left and the right.
Right.
One side loves to cover the Hunter Biden stuff, and one side loves to cover the Trump. You can never guess which is which, right? But the great news is if you're a normal American citizen and you dislike corruption in all its forms, then slide, you can just look at both of the sides, and you'll see all the corruption, those political corruption stories.
It's really liberating to just take in the both sides, the spin on both sides. It somehow unlocks your mind to like think on your own, to realize that I don't know. It's the same thing that was useful, right, in Soviet Union times for when everybody was much more aware that they're surrounded by propaganda. Right?
It's so interesting what you're saying, actually. So Noam Chomsky, used to be our MIT colleague, once said that propaganda is to democracy what violence is to totalitarianism. And what he means by that is if you have a really totalitarian government, you don't need propaganda.
Right.
People will do what you want them to do
Her thoughts
anyway,
invade
out of
your
fear,
own
right?
hunting
But
True soul. A pleasure.
otherwise,
What
you need
news from the
propaganda.
field?
So I would say actually that the propaganda is much higher quality in democracies, much more believable, and it's
That's
really
brilliant.
It's really striking when I talk to colleagues, science colleagues like from Russia and China and so on.
Impressive. She's in the
I
audience.
noticed
Let's
they
hope
are actually
this
much more
Zerel
aware
likes what we have to say.
of the propaganda in their own media than many of my American colleagues are about the propaganda in Western media.
That's brilliant.
Praise
That
the
means the propaganda in the Western media is just better.
Yes.
That's so
Everything's
brilliant.
better in the West, even the propaganda.
Oh man.
But there's
That's good.
But once you realize that, you realize there's also something very optimistic there that you can do about it, right? Because first of all, omissions, as long as there's no outright censorship, you can just look at both sides and pretty quickly piece together a much more accurate idea of what's actually going on, right?
And develop a natural skepticism too.
Yeah.
Just an analytical, scientific mind about the
Yeah.
way you take in information.
Yeah, and I think I have to say
Wave
sometimes I
of
feel that
sick
some of us in the
familiarity
academic bubble
radiates from
are
tadpoles,
too arrogant about this and somehow
sleeping
think,
and
oh,
scarcely
it's just
aware,
people who
but
aren't as
Look at them all.
educated as us.
To infect an entire
When we are
army.
often just as gullible also, we read only our media and
The
don't see
winged
through things.
serpent at the
Anyone who looks
center
at
rim.
both sides like this and
It
compares
seems their
them will
pursuit
immediately
of
start
profit
noticing
extends
the
even here.
shenanigans being pulled. And I think what I try to do with this app is that the big tech has to some extent tried to blame the individual for being manipulated, much like
A pattern of
big
blank
tobacco tried to blame
minds
the individuals
newly
entirely for
born.
smoking.
They carry
And a little later
their
on,
shred of memory,
our government stepped up and said,
inherited
actually,
from something
can't just blame little kids for starting to smoke. We have to have more responsible advertising and this and that. I think it's a bit the same here. It's very convenient for a big tech to blame. So it's just people who are so dumb and get fooled.
Down into the darkness.
The blame
It's not
usually
too late to
comes in
stop the
saying,
cult from
oh, it's just
using these
human
things.
psychology.
No.
People just want to hear what they already believe. But Professor David Rand at MIT actually partly debunked that with a really nice study showing that people tend to be interested in hearing things that go against what they believe if it's presented in a respectful way. Like, suppose, for example, that you have a company and you're just about to launch this project and you're convinced it's going to work, and someone says, you know, Lex, I hate to tell you this, but this is going to fail, and here's why.
There's a
Would you be like,
parasite
shut up, I
nearby.
don't want to hear it?
You
La la
should
la la
take
la la
a
la la.
closer look.
Would you? You would be interested, right?
Yes.
And also, if you're on an airplane, back in the pre-COVID times, you know, and the guy next to you is clearly from the opposite side of the political spectrum, but is very respectful and polite to you, wouldn't you be kind of interested to hear a bit about how he or she thinks about things?
Of course.
Right? But it's not so easy to find out respectful disagreement now, because, like, for example, if you are a Democrat and you're like, oh, I want to see something on the other side, so you just go breitbart.com, and then after the first 10 seconds you feel deeply insulted by something, and it's not going to work. Or if you take someone who votes Republican and they go to something on the left and they just get very offended very quickly by them having put a deliberately ugly picture of Donald Trump on the front page or something, it doesn't really work. So this news aggregator also has this nuance slider, which you can pull to the right, and then to make it easier to get exposed to actually more sort of academic style or more respectful
That's brilliant.
portrayals of different views. And finally, the one kind of bias I think people are mostly aware of is the left-right, right? Because it's so obvious, because both left and right are very powerful here, right? Both of them have well-funded TV stations and newspapers, and it's kind of hard to miss. But there's another one, the establishment slider, which is also really fun. I love to play
I
with
love
it.
that
And
one.
that's more about corruption,
Yes.
because if you have a society where almost all the powerful entities want you to believe a certain thing, that's what you're going to read in both the big media, mainstream media on the left and on the right, of course. And powerful companies can push back very hard. Like tobacco companies pushed back very hard back in the day when some newspapers started writing articles about tobacco being dangerous, so that it was hard to get a lot of coverage about it initially. And also, if you look geopolitically, right? Of course, in any country, when you read their media, you're mainly going to be reading a lot of articles about how our country is the good guy, and the other countries are the bad guys, right? So if you want to have a really more nuanced understanding, you know, like the Germans used to be told that the British used to be told that the French were the bad guys, and the French used to be told that the British were the bad guys. Now they visit each other's countries a lot and have a much more nuanced understanding. I don't think there's going to be any more wars between France and Germany. But on the geopolitical scale, it's just as much as ever, you know, big Cold War now, U.S.-China, and so on. And if you want to get a more nuanced understanding of what's happening geopolitically, then it's really fun to look at this establishment slider, because it turns out there are tons of little newspapers, both on the left and on the right, who sometimes challenge establishment and say, you know, maybe we shouldn't actually invade Iraq right now. Maybe this weapons of mass destruction thing was BS. If you look at the journalism research afterwards, you can actually see that quite clearly. That
Just
both
tell me what you
CNN
need.
and Fox were very pro. Let's get rid of Saddam. There are weapons of mass destruction. Then there were a lot of smaller newspapers. They were like, wait a minute, this evidence seems a bit sketchy, and maybe we... But of course, they were so hard to find. Most people didn't even know they existed, right? Yes, it would have been better for American national security if those voices had also come up. I think it harmed America's national security, actually, that we invaded Iraq.
And arguably, there's a lot
time.
more interest in that kind of thinking too from those small sources. So, like when you say big, it's more about kind of the reach of the broadcast, but it's not big in terms of the interest. I think there's a lot of interest in that kind of anti-establishment or like skepticism towards out of the box thinking. There's a lot of interest in that kind of thing. Do you see this news project or something like it being basically taking over the world as the main way we consume information? Like, how do we get there? Like, how do we, so okay, the idea is brilliant. You're calling it your little project in 2020, but how does that become the new way we consume information?
I hope, first of all, just to plant a little seed there, because normally the big barrier of doing anything in media is you need a ton of money, but this costs no money at all. I've just been paying myself, pay a tiny amount of money each month to Amazon to run the thing in their cloud. Yeah. There will never be any ads. The point is not to make any money off of it. And we just train machine learning algorithms to classify the articles and stuff, so it just kind of runs by itself. So if it actually gets good enough at some point that it starts catching on, it could scale. And if other people carbon copy it and make other versions that are better, that's the more the merrier. I think there's a real opportunity for machine learning to empower the individual against the powerful players. It's, as I said in the beginning here, it's been mostly the other way around so far, that the big players have the AI and then they tell people this is the truth, this is how it is. But it can just as well go the other way around. And when the internet was born, actually, a lot of people had this hope that maybe this will be a great thing for democracy, make it easier to find out about things. And maybe machine learning and things like this can actually help again. And I have to say, I think it's more important than ever now, right? Because this is very linked also to the whole future of life, as we discussed earlier, right? We're getting this ever more powerful tech, Frank, it's pretty clear if you look on the 1 or 2 generation, 3 generation time scale that there are only 2 ways this can end geopolitically. Yeah. Either it ends great for all of humanity, or it ends terribly for all of us. There's really no in between. We're so stuck in because technology knows no borders, and you can't have people fighting when the weapons just keep getting ever more powerful. Indefinitely. Eventually, the luck runs out. And right now we have. I love America, but the fact of the matter is, what's good for America is not opposite in the long term to what's good for other countries. It would be if this was some sort of zero-sum game, like it was thousands of years ago, when the only way one country could get more resources was to take land from other countries, because that was basically the resource, right? Look at the map of Europe. Some countries kept getting bigger and smaller, endless wars. But then, since 1945, there hasn't been any war in Western Europe, and they all got way richer because of tech. So the optimistic outcome is that the big winner in this century is going to be America and China and Russia and everybody else, because technology just makes us all healthier and wealthier, and we just find some way of keeping the peace on this planet. But I think, unfortunately, there are some pretty powerful forces right now that are pushing in exactly the opposite direction and trying to demonize other countries, which is just makes it more likely that this ever more powerful tech we're building is gonna be used in disastrous ways.
Yeah, for aggression versus cooperation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, even look at just military AI now, right? 20. It was so awesome to see these dancing robots. I loved it, right? But one of the biggest growth areas in robotics now is, of course, autonomous weapons, right? And 2020 was like the best marketing year ever for autonomous weapons, because in both Libya, civil war, and in Nagorno-Karabakh, they made the decisive difference, right? And everybody else is like watching this. Oh yeah, we want to build autonomous weapons too. In Libya, you had on one hand our ally, the United Arab Emirates, that were flying their autonomous weapons that they bought from China, bombing Libyans. And on the other side, you had our other ally, Turkey, flying their drones. And they had no skin in the game, any of these other countries. And of course, it was the Libyans who really got screwed. In Nagorno-Karabakh, you had actually, again, so now Turkey is sending drones built by this company that was actually founded by a guy who went to MIT Aeroastro. Do you know that? Baccarat DR. Yeah. So MIT has a direct responsibility for ultimately this, and a lot of civilians were killed there, you know, and so because it was militarily so effective, now suddenly there's like a huge push. Oh yeah, let's go build ever more autonomy into these weapons, and it's gonna be great. And I think actually people who are obsessed about some sort of future Terminator scenario right now should start focusing on the fact that we have two much more urgent threats happening from machine learning. One of them is the whole destruction of democracy that we've talked about now,
Yes.
where our flow of information is being manipulated by machine learning. And the other one is that right now, you know, this is the year when the big arms race out of control arms race in at least autonomous weapons is going to start, or it's going to stop.
So you have a sense that there is, like 2020 was an instrumental catalyst for the race for the autonomous weapons race.
Yeah, because it was the first year when they proved decisive in the battlefield.
Oh, man.
And these ones are still not fully autonomous. Mostly they're remote controlled, right? But, you know, we could very quickly make things about, you know, the size and cost of a smartphone, which you just put in the GPS coordinates or the face of the one you want to kill, the skin color or whatever, and it flies away and, you know, does it. And the real good reason why the US and all the other superpowers should put the kibosh on this is the same reason we decided to put the kibosh on bioweapons.
Fight.
So,
Let's go.
you know, we gave the Future of Life award, that we can talk more about later, to Matthew Messelson from Harvard before for convincing Nixon to ban bioweapons. And I asked him,
On the move.
how did you do it? And he was like, well, I just said, look, we don't want there to be a $500 weapon of mass destruction that all our enemies can afford, even non-state actors. And Nixon was like, good point. You know, it's in America's interest that the powerful weapons are all really expensive. So only we can afford them, or maybe some more stable adversaries, right? Nuclear weapons are like that. But bioweapons were not like that. That's why we banned them. And that's why you never hear about them now. That's why we love biology.
So you have a sense that it's possible for the big powerhouses in terms of the big nations in the world to agree that autonomous weapons is not a race we want to be on. That it doesn't end well.
Yeah, because we know it's just going to end in mass proliferation, and every terrorist everywhere is going to have these super cheap weapons that they will use against us. And our politicians have to constantly worry about being assassinated every time they go outdoors by some anonymous little mini drone. You know, we don't want that. And even if the U.S. and China and everyone else agree that you can only build these weapons if they cost at least $10 million,
I'm going to enjoy
that would be a huge win for the superpowers, and frankly for everybody. And people often push back and say, well, it's so hard to prevent cheating. But hey, you can say the same about bioweapons. You know, take any of our MIT colleagues in biology. Of course, they could build a nasty bioweapon if they really wanted to. But first of all, they don't want to because they think it's disgusting because of the stigma. And second, even if there's some sort of nutcase and want to, it's very likely that some of their grad students or someone would rat them out because everyone else thinks it's so disgusting, right? And in fact, we now know there was even a fair bit of cheating on the bioweapons ban, but no countries used them because it was so stigmatized that it just wasn't worth revealing that they had cheated.
for a good meal.
You talk about drones. You kind of think that drones is like remote operation.
Which they are mostly still.
Yes. But you're not taking the next intellectual step of like, where does this go? You're kind of saying the problem with drones is that you're removing yourself from direct violence. Therefore, you're not able to sort of maintain the common humanity required to make the proper decisions strategically. But that's the criticism, as opposed to like, if this is automated, and just exactly as you said, if you automate it and there's a race, then you just go to the technology can get better and better and better, which means getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah.
And unlike perhaps nuclear weapons, which is connected to resources in a way, like it's hard to get it's hard to engineer. Yeah. it feels like it's, there's too much overlap between the tech industry and autonomous weapons to where you could have smartphone type of cheapness. If you look at drones, it's a for $1,000 you can have an incredible system that's able to maintain flight autonomously for you and take pictures and stuff. You could see that going into the autonomous weapon space. That's but like, why is that not thought about or discussed enough in the public, do you think? You see those dancing Boston Dynamics robots, and everybody has this kind of like, as if this is like a far future.
Yeah.
They have this like fear, like, oh, this will be Terminator in like some, I don't know, unspecified 20, 30, 40 years. And they don't think about, well, this is like some much less dramatic version of that is actually happening now. It's not gonna be legged, it's not gonna be dancing, but it's already has the capability to use artificial intelligence to kill humans.
Yeah. The Boston Dynamics legs robots, I think the reason we imagine them holding guns is just because we've all seen Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? That's our reference point. That's pretty useless. That's not going to be the main military use of them. Yeah. They might be useful in law enforcement in the future, and there's a whole debate about, do you want robots showing up at your house with guns telling you to who will be perfectly obedient to whatever dictator controls them. But let's leave that aside for a moment and look at what's actually relevant now. So there's a spectrum of things you can do with AI in the military. And again, to put my card on the table, I'm not the pacifist. I think we should have good defense. So, for example, a Predator drone is basically a fancy little remote-controlled airplane, right? There's a human piloting it, and the decision ultimately about whether to kill somebody with it is made by a human still. And
can't give up now.
This is a line I think we should never cross. There's a current DoD policy. Again, you have to have a human in the loop. I think algorithms should never make life or death decisions. They should be left to humans.
Open up.
Now, why might we cross that line? Well, first of all, these are expensive, right? So, for example, when Azerbaijan had all these drones and Armenia didn't have any, they started trying to jerry-rig little cheap things, fly around, but then of course the Armenians would jam them, or the Azeris would jam them, and remote control things can be jammed. That makes them inferior. Also, there's a bit of a time delay between, if we're piloting something from far away, speed of light, and the human has a reaction time as well. It would be nice to eliminate that jamming possibility in the time delay by having it fully autonomous. Mm-hmm. But now you might be, so then if you do, but now you might be crossing that exact line. You might program it to just, oh yeah, dear drone, go hover over this country for a while, and whenever you find someone who is a bad guy, kill them. Mm-hmm. Now the machine is making these sort of decisions, and some people who defend this still say, well, that's morally fine because we are the good guys, and we will tell it the definition of bad guy that we think is moral. But now, you would be very naive to think that if ISIS buys that same drone, that they're going to use our definition of bad guy. Maybe for them, bad guy is someone wearing a U.S. Army uniform, right? Or maybe there will be some weird ethnic group who decides that someone of another ethnic group, they are the bad guys, right? Yes. The thing is, human soldiers, with all our faults, right, we still have some basic wiring in us. Like, no, it's not okay to kill kids and civilians. And Thomas weapon has none of that. It's just going to do whatever is programmed. It's like the perfect Adolf Eichmann on steroids. Like, they told him, Adolf Eichmann, we want you to do this and this and this to make the Holocaust more efficient. And he was like, jawohl. And off he went and did it, right? Yeah. Do we really want to make machines that are like that? Like completely amoral and will take the user's definition of who's the bad guy? And do we then want to make them so cheap that all our adversaries can have them? Like, what could possibly go wrong? That's I think the big argument for why we want to this year really put the kibosh on this. And I think you can tell there's a lot of very active debate even going on within the US military, and undoubtedly in other militaries around the world also about whether we should have some sort of international agreement to at least require that these weapons have to be above a certain size and cost, so that things just don't totally spiral out of control. And finally, just for your question about is it possible to stop it? Because some people tell me, oh, just give up, But again, so Matthew Meselson, again, from Harvard, right, who, the bioweapons hero, he had exactly this criticism also with bioweapons. People were like, how can you check for sure that the Russians aren't cheating? And he told me this, I think, really ingenious insight. He said, Max, some people think you have to have inspections and things, and you have to make sure that you can catch the cheaters with 100% chance. Mm-hmm. You don't need 100%, he said. 1% is usually enough. Because if it's just an enemy, if it's another big state, like suppose China and the US have signed the treaty, drawing a certain line and saying, yeah, these kind of drones are okay, but these fully autonomous ones are not. Now suppose you are China and you have cheated and secretly developed some clandestine little thing, or you're thinking about doing it. What's your calculation if you do? Well, you're like, okay, what's the probability that we're going to get caught? If the probability is 100%, of course we're not going to do it.
Attention.
But if the probability is 5% that we're going to get caught, then it's going to be like a huge embarrassment for us.
Yeah.
And we still have our nuclear weapons anyway, so it doesn't really make an enormous difference in terms of deterring the US,
And that feeds the stigma that you kind of establish, like this fabric, this universal stigma over the thing.
Exactly. So it's very reasonable for them to say, well, we probably get away with it, but if we don't, then the US will know we cheated, and then they're going to go full tilt with their program and say, look, the Chinese are cheaters, and now we have all these weapons against us, and that's bad. So the stigma alone is very, very powerful. And again, look what happened with bioweapons, right? It's been 50 years now. When was the last time you read about a bioterrorism attack? The only deaths I really know about with bioweapons that have happened when we Americans managed to kill some of our own with anthrax, the idiot who sent them to Tom Daschle and others in letters, right? And similarly, in Sverdlovsk in the Soviet Union, they had some anthrax in some lab there. Maybe they were cheating or who knows, and it leaked out and killed a bunch of Russians. I'd say that's a pretty good success, right? 50 years, just 2 own goals by the superpowers, and then nothing. And that's why whenever I ask anyone what they think about biology, they think it's great. They associate it with new cures, new diseases, maybe a good vaccine. This is how I want to think about AI in the future. I want others to think about AI too, as a source of all these great solutions to our problems, not as AI. Oh yeah, that's the reason I feel scared going outside these days.
Yeah, it's kind of brilliant that the bioweapons and nuclear weapons we've figured out. I mean, of course, there's still a huge source of danger, but we figured out some way of creating rules and social stigma over these weapons that then creates stability, or whatever that gave theoretic stability that occurs.
Exactly.
And we don't have that with AI. And you're kind of screaming from the top of the mountain about this, that we need to find that, because just like, it's very possible, with the Future of Life that you point out, Institute Awards pointed out that, with nuclear weapons, we could have destroyed ourselves quite a few times. And it's a learning
experience
that it's very costly.
We gave, this Future Life Award, we gave it the first time to this guy, Vasily Arkhipov. He was on, most people haven't even heard of him.
Yeah, can you say who he is?
Vasily Arkhipov, he has, in my opinion, made the greatest positive contribution to humanity of any human in modern history. And maybe it sounds like hyperbole here, like I'm just over the top, but let me tell you the story, and I think maybe you'll agree. So, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we Americans first didn't know that the Russians had sent 4 submarines, but we caught 2 of them, and we didn't know that
After
So
your
we
crimes,
practiced depth
innumerable,
charges on the one that
you
he was
would have
on,
occurred
try to force it to the
before me.
surface.
Enough.
But we didn't know that
This
this nuclear submarine
ends
actually was a
here and
nuclear
now.
submarine with a nuclear
At
torpedo.
last.
We also didn't know that they
will
had
crumble at the
authorization to
power of
launch
your
it
touch.
without clearance
Give
from
him all
Moscow.
you have.
And we also didn't
The
know that
gods fight
they were
at our
running out of
side.
electricity. Their batteries were almost dead. They were running out of oxygen. Sailors were fainting left and right. The temperature was about 110, 120 Fahrenheit on board. It was really hellish conditions, really just a kind of doomsday. And at that point, these giant explosions start happening and the Americans dropping. The captain thought World War III had begun. They decided they were going to launch the nuclear torpedo. And one of them shouted, we're all going to die, but we're not going to disgrace our Navy, We don't know what would have happened if there had been a giant mushroom cloud all of a sudden, against the Americans. But since everybody had their hands on the triggers, you don't have to be too creative to think that it could have led to an all-out nuclear war, in which case we wouldn't be having this conversation now, right? What actually took place was they needed 3 people to approve this.
Days.
The captain had said yes. There was the Communist Party political officer. He also said yes, let's do it. And the third man was this guy, Vasily Arkhipov, who said niet.
Yeah.
For some reason, he was just more chill than the others, and he was the right man at the right time. I don't want us, as a species, rely on the right person being there at the right time. We tracked down his family, living in relative poverty outside Moscow. When we flew his daughter, he had passed away, and flew them to London. They had never been to the West even. It was incredibly moving to get to honor them for this. The next year, we gave this Future Life Award to Stanislav Petrov. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
So he was in charge of the Soviet early warning station, which was built with Soviet technology and honestly not that reliable. It said that there were 5 US missiles coming in. Again, if they had launched at that point, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. He decided, based on just mainly gut instinct, to just not escalate this. And I'm very glad he wasn't replaced by an AI that was just automatically following orders. And then we gave the third one to Matthew Messelson. Last year, we gave this award to these guys who actually use technology for good. It's not avoiding something bad, but for something good. The guys who eliminated this disease, which is way worse than COVID, that had killed 500 million people in its final century. Smallpox, you mentioned it earlier. COVID, on average, kills less than 1% of people who get it. Smallpox, about 30%. And they just ultimately, Viktor Zhdanov and Bill Foege, most of my colleagues have never heard of either of them. One American, one Russian. They did this amazing effort. Not only was Zhdanov able to get the US and the Soviet Union to team up against smallpox during the Cold War, but Bill Foege came up with this ingenious strategy for making it actually go all the way to defeat the disease without funding for vaccinating everyone. And as a result, we haven't had any. We went from 15 million deaths the year I was born in smallpox. So what do we have in COVID now? A little bit short of 3 million, right? To 0 deaths, of course, this year, and forever. And there have been 200 million people, they estimate, who would have died since then by smallpox had it not been for this. So isn't science awesome?
Yeah, that.
When you use it for good. And the reason we want to celebrate these sort of people is to remind them of this. Science is so awesome when you use it for good.
And those awards actually, the variety there, take a very big detail. The first 2 are looking at. It's kind of exciting to think that these average humans, in some sense, that they're products of billions of other humans that came before them, evolution, and some little. You said gut, but there's something in there that stopped the annihilation of the human race, and that's a magical thing. But that's like this deeply human thing. And then there's the other aspect where it's also very human, which is to build solution to the existential crises that we're facing, like to build it, to take the responsibility, to come up with different technologies and so on.
Yeah.
And both of those are deeply human. The gut and the mind, whatever that is.
Yeah,
That
and the
creates-
best is when they work together. Arkhipov, I wish I could have met him, of course, but he had passed away. He was really a fantastic military officer, combining all the best traits that we in America admire in our military. Because, first of all, he was very loyal, of course. He never even told anyone about this during his whole life, even though you think he had some bragging rights, right?
Yes.
But he just was like, this is just business, just doing my job. It only came out later after his death. And second, the reason he did the right thing was not because he was some sort of liberal or some sort of, not because he was just, peace and love. It was partly because he had been the captain on another submarine that had a nuclear reactor meltdown. And it was his heroism that helped contain this. That's why he died of cancer later also. But he's seen many of his crew members die. And I think for him, that gave him this gut feeling that, if there's a nuclear war between the US and the Soviet Union, the whole world is going to go through what I saw my dear crew members suffer through. It wasn't just an abstract thing for him. I think it was real. And second, though, not just the gut, the mind. Right? He was, for some reason, very level-headed personality and a very smart guy, which is exactly what we want our best fighter pilots to be also, right? I never forget Neil Armstrong when he's landing on the moon and almost running out of gas. And he doesn't even change when they say 30 seconds. He doesn't even change the tone of voice. He just keeps going. Arkhipov, I think, was just like that. So when the explosions start going off and his captain is screaming and we should nuke them and all, he's like,
You will fall as sure as she. This has
I don't think
only
the Americans
begun.
are trying to sink us. I think they're trying to send us a message. It was a pretty badass.
Yes.
Coolness. Because he said,
Yeah.
if they wanted to sink us,
be possible?
and he said, listen. It's alternating. One loud explosion on the left, one on the right. One on the left, one on the right. He was the only one who noticed this pattern. And he's like, I think this is them trying to send us a signal that they want us to surface. They're not going to sink us. And somehow,
Survival is all that matters.
this is how he then managed to ultimately, with his combination of gut and also just cool analytical thinking, was able to de-escalate the whole thing. And so this is some of the best in humanity. I guess coming back to what we talked about earlier, the combination of the neural network, the instinctive, with
Yeah.
I'm getting tearing up here, getting
Yeah.
emotional. But he was just, he is one of my superheroes.
Vow, or you break.
Having both the gut, the heart, and the mind combined.
And especially in that time, there's something about this is in America, people are used to this kind of idea of being the individual, of like on your own thinking.
Yeah.
I think in the Soviet Union, under communism, it's actually much harder to do that.
Oh yeah, he didn't get any accolades either when he came back for this, right? They just wanted to hush the whole thing up.
Yeah, there's echoes of that with Chernobyl. There's all kinds of that's a really hopeful thing that amidst big centralized powers, whether it's companies or states, there's still the power of the individual to think on their own, to act.
But I think we need to think of people like this not as a panacea we can always count on, but rather as a wake-up call.
Yes.
So because of them, because of Arkhipov, we are alive to learn from this lesson. To learn from the fact that we shouldn't keep playing Russian roulette to almost have a nuclear war by mistake now and then. Because relying on luck is not a good long-term strategy.
Well,
if you keep playing
no
Russian
choice
roulette over
but
and
to
over again,
follow.
the probability of surviving just drops exponentially with time.
Yeah.
And if you have some probability of having an accidental nuke war every year, the probability of not having one also drops exponentially. I think we can do better than that. So I think the message is very clear. Once in a while, shit happens, and there's a lot of very concrete things we can do to reduce the risk of things like that happening in the first place.
On the AI front, if we just link on that for a second. So you're friends with, you often talk with Elon Musk throughout history. You've did a lot of interesting things together. He has a set of fears about the future of
The
artificial
general
intelligence,
that thing he
AGI.
summoned was illicit.
Do you have a sense?
Follow it below
we've-
and find
We've already
him
talked about
before he has a
the
chance
things we
to
should be
subdue the
worried
Night
about with
Song
AI.
again.
Do you have a sense of the shape
Better
of
they
his
stay.
fears in particular?
But if you
About
have room
AI,
for one lone soldier,
of the which
I
subset
would
of what
face
we've
Keverick
talked about,
by your
whether it's
side.
creating, it's that direction of creating sort of these giant computational systems that are not explainable, that they're not intelligible intelligence, or
As you wish.
is it the and then like as a branch of that, is it the manipulation by big corporations of that, or individual evil people to use that for destruction, or the unintentional consequences? Do you have a sense of where his thinking is on this?
Assume nothing.
From my many conversations with Elon, yeah,
My faith will guide me.
I certainly have a model of how he thinks. It's actually very much like the way I think also. I'll elaborate on it a bit. I just wanted to push back on when you said evil people. I don't think it's a very helpful concept, evil people.
Yes.
Sometimes people do very, very bad things, but they usually do it because they think it's a good thing.
Yes.
Because somehow other people had told them that was a good thing, or given them incorrect information, or whatever, right? I believe in the fundamental goodness of humanity, that if we
The whole yawns
educate
back
people
at
well
you,
and they find out how things
impossibly
really
wide.
are,
A single
people generally
tentacle
want to
burrowed
do
through
good and be
stone.
good.
Hence the value alignment. As
Yeah.
opposed to, it's about information,
Yes.
about knowledge, and then once we have that, we'll likely be able to do good in the way that's aligned with everybody else who thinks.
Yeah, and it's not just the individual people we have to align. So we don't just want people
to the source of the
to
infections.
be educated to know the way things actually are and to treat each other well. But we also need to align other non-human entities. We talked about corporations. There has to be institutions so that what they do is actually good for the country they're in, and we should make sure that what countries do is actually good for the species as a whole, etc. Coming back to Elon, yeah, my understanding of how Elon sees this is really quite similar to my own, which is one of the reasons I like him so much and enjoy talking with him so much. I feel he's quite different from most people in that he thinks much more than most people about the really big picture, not just what's going to happen in the next election cycle, but in millennia, millions and billions of years from now, right? And when you look in this more cosmic perspective, it's so obvious that we're gazing out into this universe that, as far as we can tell, is mostly dead, with life being a almost imperceptibly tiny perturbation, right? And he sees this enormous opportunity for our universe to come alive, for us to become an interplanetary species. Mars is obviously just first stop on this cosmic journey, and precisely because he thinks more long term, it's much more clear to him than to most people that what we do with this Russian roulette thing we keep playing with our nukes is a really poor strategy, a really reckless strategy. And also that we're just building these ever more powerful AI systems that we don't understand is also just a really reckless strategy. I feel Elon is very much a humanist in the sense that he wants an awesome future for humanity. He wants to be us that control the machines rather than the machines that control us.
Yes.
And why shouldn't we insist on that? I mean, we're building them after all, right? Why should we build things that just make us into some little cog in the machinery that has no further say in the matter, right? That's not my idea of an inspiring future either.
Yeah, if you think on the cosmic scale in terms of both time and space, so much is put into perspective.
Yeah. Whenever I have a bad day, that's what I think about. It immediately makes me feel better.
It makes me sad that for us individual humans, at least for now, the ride ends too quickly. That we don't get to experience the cosmic scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think of our universe sometimes as an organism that has only begun to wake up a tiny bit. Just like when the very first little glimmers of consciousness you have in the morning when you start coming around.
Before the coffee.
Before the coffee, even before you get out of bed, before you even open your eyes, they start to wake up a little bit. Oh, there's something here, That's very much how I think of well, we are, all those galaxies out there, I think they're really beautiful. But why are they beautiful? they're beautiful because conscious entities are actually observing them and experiencing them through our telescopes. If I, I define consciousness as subjective experience, whether it be colors or emotions or sounds. So beauty is an experience, meaning is an experience, purpose is an experience. If there was no conscious experience observing these galaxies, they wouldn't be beautiful. If we do something dumb with advanced AI in the future here, and Earth originating life goes extinct, and that was it for this, if there is nothing else with telescopes in our universe, then it's kind of game over for meaning, beauty and meaning and purpose in our whole universe. And I think that would be just such an opportunity lost, frankly. And I think when Elon points this out, he gets very unfairly maligned in the media for all the dumb media bias reasons we talked about, right? They want to print precisely the things about Elon out of context that are really clickbaity. Like, he has gotten so much flack for this summoning the demon statement.
Yeah.
I happen to know exactly the context because I was in the front row when he gave that talk. It was at MIT, you'll be pleased to know. It was the Aero Astro anniversary. They had Buzz Aldrin there from the moon landing, the whole house at Kresge Auditorium packed with MIT students. And he had this amazing Q&A. It might have gone for an hour, and they talked about rockets and Mars and everything. At the very end, this one student who was actually in my class asked, what about AI? Elon makes this one comment, and they take this out of context.
We are very
print
close
it,
to the source
goes
of the
viral.
absolute now.
Was it like with AI, we're summoning the
Telepathic
demons, something
storm
like that?
has become a tempest.
And try to cast him as some sort of doom and gloom dude, you know.
Yeah.
You know Elon. That
Yes.
is not attacking. He's not the doom and gloom dude.
Yeah.
He is such a positive visionary, and the whole reason he warns about this is because he realizes more than most what the opportunity cost is of screwing up. That there is so much awesomeness in the future that we can and our descendants can enjoy if we don't screw up, right? I get so pissed off when people try to cast him as some sort of technophobic Luddite. And at this point, it's kind of ludicrous when I hear people say that people who worry
Mind
about
players and civilians,
artificial general intelligence are
side by
Luddites,
side.
because, of course, if you look more closely,
This
you
must
have
be where they
some of the
infect
most
and transform those they
outspoken
kidnap.
people making warnings are people like Professor Stuart Russell from Berkeley, who's written the best-selling AI textbook, you know.
Brine pools.
So claiming that
empty of
he's a
tadpoles.
Luddite who doesn't understand
Unusual.
AI is the joke is
Harvesting
really
all
on
the larvae
the people who
indicates they are
said it.
getting
But I
ready
think more
for
broadly,
something big.
this message is really not sunk in at all. What it is that people worry about, they think that Elon and Stuart Russell and others are worried about the dancing robots picking up an AR-15 and going on a rampage, right? They think they're worried about robots turning evil. They're not. I'm not. You know, the risk is not malice. It's competence. The risk is just that we build some systems that are incredibly competent, which means they're always going to get their goals accomplished, even if they clash with our goals. That's the risk. Why did we humans, drive the West African black rhino extinct? Is it because we're malicious, evil rhinoceros haters? No. It's just because our goals didn't align with the goals of those rhinos, and tough luck for the rhinos, So, the point is just we don't want to put ourselves in the position of those rhinos, creating these something more powerful than us.
Get me out
If
of
we
this
haven't
thing.
first figured out how to align the
And I'll
goals.
let Will
And
offer your
I'm
eyes
optimistic. I
turn
think
to
we
the
could do
control
it if we
panel
worked
next
really
to
hard
the
on it,
pod.
because
It
I
has
spent a
two
lot of time
devices. The
around
controls are
intelligent
open
entities
to your
that were more
tadpole's
intelligent than me.
command.
My
To
mom and my
your
dad.
authority.
And I was little, and that was fine because their goals were actually aligned with mine quite well. But we've seen today many examples of where the goals of our powerful systems are not so
The
aligned.
symbol's
So
meaning
those
comes into focus.
click-through
Annihilate.
optimization algorithms
You decipher the
that are
symbol.
polarized social media,
It's
right?
an
They were actually
livid
pretty
sigil,
poorly aligned with
meaning
what was
unleash.
good for democracy, it turned out. And again, almost all problems we've had in machine learning, again, came so far not from malice, but from poor alignment. And that's exactly why we should be concerned about it in the future.
Do you think it's possible that with systems like Neuralink and brain-computer interfaces you know, again, thinking of the cosmic scale, Elon's talked about this, but others
Good work.
have as well throughout
I'd
history.
give you a gold
of
star, but
figuring
as for
out
the
how
pact,
the exact mechanism of how to achieve that kind of alignment.
Clause
So one
Z,
of them is
Section
having a
13.
symbiosis with
If the
AI,
soul binder
which is like
consents to
coming up
separation,
with clever
she
ways
will
where
release
we're
the
like
soul
stuck
bearer
together in
from
this
all-
weird relationship,
ignorant
whether
thing.
it's biological
It's always the
or
terms and
in
conditions
some kind of
that
other
get
way.
you.
Do you think that's a possibility of having that kind of symbiosis, or do we want to instead kind of focus on this distinct
Not going
entities
to happen.
of us humans talking to these intelligible,
I'm out of here. I
self-doubting
need a
AIs,
long
maybe like
bath.
Stuart Russell
But
thinks
don't you
about it, like
fret.
these
If you
these
survive
we're
this place,
self-doubting and full of
I'll find
uncertainty, and then
you.
have our AI systems that are full of uncertainty. We communicate
And
back
ask
and forth,
Will how we
and
met.
in that way achieve
I've
symbiosis.
loosened his tongue.
I honestly don't know. I would say that because we don't know for sure what, if any of our, which of any of our ideas will work, but we do know that if we don't, I'm pretty convinced that if we don't get any of these things to work and just barge ahead, then our species is, probably going to go extinct this century. I think
This century, you think we're facing this crisis is a 21st century crisis. Like
Oh, yeah.
this century will be remembered
on a hard drive somewhere.
on a hard drive somewhere, or maybe by future generations as like there will be future of Life Institute awards for people that have done something about AI.
It could also end even worse, where we're not superseded by leaving any AI behind either, where we just totally wipe out, like on Easter Island. Our century is long. No, there are still 79 years left of it. Right? Think about how
The
far we've
controls
come
are
just in the
open
last
to your
30 years.
tadpole's command. The
So-
symbol's meaning comes into focus.
We can talk more about
Your
what
heart
might go wrong, but
burns
you asked me
red
this really
hot.
good question about what's the best strategy.
Then
Is it
goes
Neuralink or Russell's
A
approach
presence
or whatever?
disappears from your mind.
I think,
The hells have taken Will as
when we did the Manhattan Project,
He's lost to
we
the
didn't
fire.
know
Wait.
if any of our 4 ideas for enriching uranium and getting out the uranium-235 were going to work. We felt this was really important to get it before Hitler did. So what we did? We tried all 4 of them. No! Here, I think it's analogous, where there's the greatest threat that's ever faced our species, and of course U.S. national security by implication. We don't know, we don't have any method that's guaranteed to work, but we have a lot of ideas. So we should invest pretty heavily in pursuing all of them with an open mind, in the hope that one of them at least works. The good news is the century is long, and it might take decades until we have artificial general intelligence. So we have some time, hopefully. But it takes a long time also to solve these very, very difficult problems. It's going to actually it's the most difficult problem we were ever trying to solve as a species. So
The
we have to
controls are
start now,
open to your
so
tadpole's
we don't
command.
have, rather than begin
decipher
thinking
the
about it the
symbol.
night before.
It's an illithid
When people who've had too
sigil,
much Red Bull
meaning
switch it on, and we have to.
Good
Coming back to your
work.
question,
As
we have
for
to
the
pursue all of these
Clause
different
Z,
avenues and see.
If you were
ignorant
my
thing.
investment advisor,
It's always the
and I was
terms and
trying to
conditions
invest
that get
in the
you.
future, how do you think the human species
Oh, don't be so
is most
hard
likely
on
to
him,
destroy itself
with his daddy issues
in
and all.
this century?
Right.
Yeah,
I'm out
so
of here,
if
but
the
don't you
crises,
fret.
many of the crises
If
we're
you
facing are
survive.
really before us
Oh.
within the next 100 years, how do we
Watching me.
make explicit make known the unknowns and solve those problems to avoid the biggest, starting with the biggest existential crisis?
So as your investment advisor, how are you planning to make money on us destroying ourselves? I have to ask.
I don't know. It's might be the Russian origins. It's somehow is involved.
At the micro level of detailed strategies, of course, these are unsolved problems. For AI alignment, we can break it into 3 sub-problems that are all unsolved. I think you want first to make machines understand our goals, then adopt our goals, and then retain our goals. So to hit on all 3 real quickly. The problem when Andreas Lubitz told his autopilot to fly into the Alps was that the computer didn't even understand anything about his goals, right? It was too dumb. It could have understood, actually, but you would have had to put some effort in as a system designer. Don't fly into mountains. So that's the first challenge. How do you program into computers human values, human goals? We can start, rather than saying, oh, it's so hard, we should start with the simple stuff, as I said. Or self-driving cars, airplanes, just put in all the goals that we all agree on already. And then have a habit of whenever machine gets smarter so they can understand one level higher goals, put them into. The second challenge is getting them to adopt the goals. It's easy for situations like that where you just program it in, but when you have self-learning systems like children, any parent knows that
I have no need for
there's a difference between getting our kids to understand what we want them to do and to actually adopt our goals, right? With humans, with children, fortunately, they go through this phase. First, they're too dumb to understand what we want, our goals are, and then they have this period of some years when they're both smart enough to understand them and malleable enough that we have a chance to raise them well. And then they become teenagers. It's kind of too late. But we have this window. With machines, the challenge is the intelligence might grow so fast that window is pretty short. So that's a research problem. The third one is, how do you make sure they keep the goals if they keep learning more and getting smarter? Many sci-fi movies are about how you have something which initially was aligned, but then things kind of go off keel. And my kids were very, very excited about their Legos when they were little. Now they're just gathering dust in the basement. If we create machines that are really on board with the goal of taking care of humanity, we don't want them to get as bored with us and as my kids got with Legos. So this is another research challenge. How can you make some sort of recursively self-improving system retain certain basic goals?
That said, a lot of adult people still play with Legos, so maybe we succeeded with the Legos.
Maybe. I like your optimism. But above
So
all,
not all AI systems have to maintain the goals, right? Just some fraction.
yeah. So there's a lot of talented AI researchers now who have heard of this and want to work on it. Not so much funding for it yet. Of the billions that go into building AI more powerful, it's only a minuscule fraction so far going into this safety research. My attitude is generally we should not try to slow down the technology, but we should greatly accelerate the investment in this sort of safety research, and also make sure. This was very embarrassing last year, but the NSF decided to give out 6 of these big institutes. We got one of them for AI and science. You asked me about. Another one was supposed to be for AI safety research, and they gave it people studying oceans and climate and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm all for studying oceans and climates, but we need to actually have some money that actually goes into AI safety research also, and doesn't just get grabbed by whatever. That's a fantastic investment. And then at the higher level, you ask this question: okay, what can we do? What are the biggest risks? I think we cannot just consider this to be only a technical problem. Again, because if you solve only the technical problem, can I play with your robot?
Yes, please.
If we just get our machines, to just blindly obey the orders we give them, so we can always trust that it will do what we want, that might be great for the owner of the robot. It might not be so great for the rest of humanity if that person is that least favorite world leader or whatever you imagine, right? So we have to also apply alignment not just to machines, but to all the other powerful structures. That's why it's so important to strengthen our democracy again, as I said, to have institutions, make sure that the playing field is not rigged, so that corporations are given the right incentives to do the things that both make profit and are good for people, to make sure that countries have incentives to do things that are both good for their people and don't screw up the rest of the world. And this is not just something for AI nerds, to geek out on. This is an interesting challenge for political scientists, economists, and so many other thinkers.
So one of the magical things that perhaps makes this Earth quite unique is that it's home to conscious beings. So you mentioned consciousness.
The absolute is behind this door.
Perhaps as a small aside, because we didn't really get specific to what how we might do the alignment. Like you said, it's just a really important research problem. But
Yeah.
do you think engineering consciousness into AI systems is a possibility? Is something that we might
You
one
said
day
it
do,
was
or
under
is there
control.
something fundamental to consciousness
you
that
I
is
answer to,
is there something
Gortash.
about consciousness that is fundamental to humans and humans only?
Gortash.
I think it's possible. I think both consciousness
Oh, the
and
general
intelligence
voice.
are
Is this where
information
we salute?
processing, certain types of information processing.
Yes.
And
with
that
cleavers
fundamentally,
through his
it doesn't matter
blood-starved
whether the
flesh.
information is processed by
How it
carbon
crawls with
atoms in
failure,
neurons
like
in
flies on
brains or by
liquid
silicon
carrion.
atoms and
You forget
so on in our
yourself,
technology.
Warren. I have played
Some
my
people
part.
disagree. This is what I think as a
You
physicist.
built
And
an army
I
for our masters, true
and,
enough. But what of the
That
aspect?
consciousness is the same kind
A
of.
rogue
You
true
said consciousness
soul
is information
flaunting it under your
processing.
nose all this
So
time,
meaning,
and
you know,
ran.
I think you had a quote of
Sure
something
that
like
they would follow and
it's
deliver it into my
information,
hands here. If you
knowing
would cease
yourself, that
these
kind of thing.
I think
distractions.
consciousness is, yeah,
The
is
distractions have
the
been
way
yours,
information
Henry.
feels when it's being processed.
Was
These
people
are sort of
that-
complex
yeah,
ways. We
that's
don't
right.
know exactly what those complex ways are. It's clear that most
So
of the
you
information
haven't
processing in
lost
our
your
brains
edge.
does not create
But
an
you're still not as
experience. We're
sharp
not
as Orin,
even
I
aware of
wager.
it, right? Like, for example, you're not
slayer
aware of your
against the
heartbeat regulation
undying
right now,
one.
even though it's
That'd
clearly
be
being
fun
done
to
by your
see.
body, right? It's just kind of doing its own thing. When you go
His
jogging,
great breath
there's a lot of
sings to my
complicated stuff
sinews
about how you put your foot down. And we know it's hard. That's why robots used to fall over so much. But you're mostly
He
unaware
must
about
lead
it.
the murder
Your
march
brain,
to Baldur's
your
Gate.
CEO consciousness module just sends an email. Hey, I'm going to keep jogging along this path.
Yeah.
The rest is on
Catherine.
autopilot, right?
Might I
So
suggest
most of it is not
closing
conscious,
your
but somehow
fist? Orin and
there
I
is
can
some
wait for you no
of the
longer.
information processing which is.
The plan proceeds.
We don't
We're
know
going to the city,
what,
and we expect you
what
to
exactly.
follow.
I
Army
think
and
this is
the
a science
weapon in
problem
tow.
that I hope one day we'll have some
The
equation
edict
for or something,
of
so we can be able to build a consciousness detector and say, yeah, here there is some consciousness, here there is not. Oh, don't boil that lobster because it's feeling pain, or it's okay because it's not feeling pain. Right now we treat this as sort of just metaphysics, but it would be very useful in emergency rooms to know if a patient has locked-in syndrome and is conscious, or if they are actually just out. And in the future, if you build a very, very intelligent helper robot to take care of you, I think you'd like to know if you should feel guilty about
The
shutting it down,
testament of
or
Merkel.
or if it's just like a zombie going through the motions, like a fancy tape recorder,
An
right?
elder brain.
And it
One
once we
of the
can
cruelest
make
and
progress
most
on the science
powerful
of
creatures
consciousness
in
and
existence.
figure out
Enslaved
what is
by
conscious
mere
and what
mortals.
isn't, then
There we are. It wouldn't do
we,
to fight in front of our
assuming
guests.
we want to
Behold,
create
Duke
positive
Rengar.
experiences and not
The
suffering,
absolute
we'll probably choose to build
Preserve
some
us.
machines that are deliberately unconscious,
You wag your
that do
word, flap in vain,
incredibly
Alderling.
boring, repetitive
Once the
jobs in a
world holds the
iron
weight,
mine somewhere or whatever.
your
And
shredded
maybe we'll
flesh will
choose to create
serve us.
helper robots for the elderly that are conscious, so that people don't just feel creeped out that the robot is just faking it when it acts like it's sad or happy.
I like how you said elderly. I
it's
think
really
everybody gets
time we
pretty
were going.
deeply lonely in this world,
Yeah. We will
and
empty this
so there's
place
a
and begin
place
the
I think for
march.
everybody to have
You
a
may catch up
connection
with
with
the army
conscious
once you
beings,
retrieve the
whether they're
weapon.
human
And Catherine,
or otherwise.
do
But
try
I know
not
for
to
sure that I would,
You're supposed to be the
if I
fearsome
had a
general
robot,
come to conquer
if I was
the
going to
city.
develop any kind of personal, emotional connection with it,
And I
I would
am
be
a
very
hero
creeped out if I
who
knew
will
at an
save
intellectual level that the whole thing was just a fraud. Now today you can buy a little talking doll for a kid, which will say things, and the little child will often think this is actually conscious, and even real secrets to it that then go on the internet and with all sorts of creepy repercussions. I would not want to be just hacked and tricked like this. If I was going to be developing real emotional connections with a robot, I would want to know that this is actually real. It's acting conscious, acting happy because it actually feels it. And I think this is not sci-fi. I think
It's possible to measure, to come up with tools, and after we understand the science of consciousness,
Yeah.
you're saying we'll be able to come up with tools that can measure consciousness and definitively say, like, this thing is experiencing the things it says it's experiencing.
kind of by definition, if it is a physical phenomena, information processing, and we know that some information processing is conscious and some isn't, well, then there is something there to be discovered with methods of science. Giulio Tononi has stuck his neck out the farthest and written down some equations for a theory. Maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong, we certainly don't know. But I applaud that kind of effort. So take this, say this,
What is it,
say
I
this is
wonder,
not just
that
something
draws
that
one
philosophers
toward
can have
death like a
beer
moth to
and
light?
muse about, but something we can measure and
You
study.
could have
And
run
bringing that
away,
back to us, I think what we
absconded
would
with the
probably
prism.
choose to do, as I said, is if we cannot figure this out,
One thing that could
choose
prevent
to
me
make
from fulfilling
to
my
be quite mindful about what
destiny.
sort of consciousness, if
But the
any,
lure of
we
one's
put in
destiny
different
is
machines that we have.
irresistible,
We
isn't it? Perhaps you hope to
and
learn
certainly
your place in history
we
before
wouldn't
you
want to
are
make, we
erased
should not
from it.
be making a bunch of machines
The
that
bright flash
suffer
of
without us even
clarity
knowing it, right?
before the snuffing
And
out.
if at any point someone decides to upload themselves, like Ray Kurzweil wants to do, I don't know if you've had him on your show.
We agree, but then COVID happened, so
Okay.
we're waiting it out a little bit.
You know, suppose he uploads
Impossible.
himself into this
You are bound
Robo
to it,
Ray,
and in death
and it
it
talks
will
like
bind you to
him
me.
and acts like him and laughs
That
like him,
is
and
the power
before he powers
my
off his
Lord
biological body,
Merkel has granted me.
he would probably be pretty disturbed if he
Command over
realized
the
that there's no one
immeasurable
home.
legions
This
of the
robot is
dead.
not having any subjective
But he
experience.
did not only
right?
give me power.
If
He
humanity
gave me
gets
the one
replaced
thing
by
no other God could grant me.
by machine
My
descendants,
daughter's life
do all these
returned.
cool things and build spaceships
Her heart
and go to
beating once
intergalactic rock concerts. And it turns out that they were
he asked
all
that I serve as
unconscious,
his chosen.
just going through the motions.
Join
Wouldn't that be
Orin
like
and
the
Gortash
ultimate
to grow the cult
robot
of the
zombie
absolute,
apocalypse?
and
Right,
then
just a play for empty benches.
take control
Yeah,
of it.
I have a sense that there's some kind of,
He's never
once
had
we
a
understand
more
consciousness
devoted
better, we'll
follower.
understand that there's some kind of
I have fought
continuum,
great wars
and
before.
it'll be a greater
in the service
appreciation.
of other
And we'll
gods
probably
and other
understand,
powers.
just like you said,
But
it'd
for
be unfortunate if
Merkel,
it's a
I
trick.
would condemn
We'll probably
all of
definitely
Pharaoh
understand that
to
love is
death.
indeed a trick
You
that we
are all
play on
that
each other,
stands between me and my
that we
destiny.
humans are, we convince
And you have
ourselves we're
brought the
conscious, but
prism
we're really,
here. I will kill you now.
us and trees and dolphins
And
are
then I
all
will
the
raise
same
you.
kind of
Can I
consciousness.
try to cheer you up a little bit with a philosophical thought here about the
Yes.
love part?
Yes, let's do it.
You know,
Yes.
you might say, okay, yeah, love is just
Join
a
the army of the
collaboration
dead,
enabler.
true soul.
And then maybe you can go and get depressed about that. But I think that would be the wrong conclusion, actually. You know, like, I know that the only reason I enjoy food is because my genes hacked me and they don't want me to starve to death. Not because they care about me consciously enjoying succulent delights of pistachio ice cream, but they just want me to make copies of them. The whole thing. So in a sense, the whole enjoyment of food is also a scam, like this. But does that mean I shouldn't take pleasure in this pistachio ice cream? I love pistachio ice cream, and I can tell you, I know this is an experimental fact. I enjoy pistachio ice cream every bit as much, even though I scientifically know exactly what kind of scam this was.
Your genes really appreciate that you like the pistachio ice cream.
Well, but my mind appreciates it too, you know, and I have a conscious experience right now. Ultimately, all of my brain is also just something the genes built to copy themselves. But so what? You know, I'm grateful that, yeah, thanks genes for doing this, but you know, now it's my brain that's in charge here, and I'm gonna enjoy my conscious experience. Thank you very much. And not just pistachio ice cream, but also the love I feel for my amazing wife, and all the other delights of being conscious. Actually, Richard Feynman, I think, said this so well. He is also the guy who really got me into physics. Some art friend said that, oh, science kind of just is the party pooper. It kind of ruins the fun, right? When like you have a beautiful flower, says the artist, and then the scientist is going to deconstruct that into just a blob of quarks and electrons. And Feynman just pushed back on that in such a beautiful way, which I think also can be used to push back and make you not feel guilty about falling in love. So here's what Feynman basically said. He said to his friend, you know, yeah, I can also, as a scientist, see that this is a beautiful flower. Thank you very much. Maybe I can't draw as good a painting as you because I'm not as talented an artist. But yeah, I can really see the beauty in it, and it also looks beautiful to me. But in addition to that, Feynman said, as a scientist, I see even more beauty that the artist did not see. Right? Suppose this is a flower on a blossoming apple tree. You could say this tree has more beauty in it than just the colors and the fragrance. This tree is made of air, Feynman wrote. This is one of my favorite Feynman quotes ever. And it took carbon out of the air and bound it in using the flaming heat of the sun to turn air into tree. And when you burn logs in your fireplace, it's really beautiful to think that this is being reversed. Now the wood is going back into air, and in this flaming, beautiful dance of the fire that the artist can see is the flaming light of the sun that was bound in to turn the air into tree. And then the ashes is the little residue that didn't come from the air, that the tree touched out of the ground. No, Feynman said these are beautiful things, and science just adds. It doesn't subtract. And I feel exactly that way about love and about pistachio ice cream also. I can understand that there is even more nuance to the whole thing, right? At this very visceral level, you can fall in love just as much as someone who knows nothing about neuroscience. But you can also appreciate this even greater beauty in it. Just like, isn't it remarkable that it came about from this completely lifeless universe, just a bunch of a hot blob of plasma expanding, and then over the eons, gradually, first the strong nuclear force decided to combine quarks together into nuclei, and then the electric force bound in electrons and made atoms, and then they clustered from gravity, and you got planets and stars and this and that, and then natural selection came along, and the genes had their little thing, and you started getting what went from seeming like a completely pointless universe that was just trying to increase entropy and approach heat death into something that looked more goal-oriented. Isn't that kind of beautiful? And then this goal-orientedness through evolution got ever more sophisticated, where you got ever more, and then you started getting this thing which is kind of like DeepMind's mu-zero on steroids. The ultimate self-play is not what DeepMind's AI does against itself to get better at Go. It's what all these little quark blobs did against each other in the game of survival of the fittest. When you had really dumb bacteria living in a simple environment, there wasn't much incentive to get intelligent. But then the life made environment more complex, and then there was more incentive to get even smarter, and that gave the other organisms more of incentive to also get smarter. And then here we are now, just like mu-zero learned to become world master at Go and chess from playing against itself by just playing against itself. All the quarks here on our planet, the electrons, have created giraffes and elephants and humans and
pistachio
love.
ice cream.
I just find that really beautiful, and to me that just adds to the enjoyment of love. It doesn't subtract anything. Do you feel a little more
I feel
careful now?
way better. That was incredible. So this self-play of quarks, taking back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit, there's so many exciting possibilities about artificial intelligence understanding the basic laws of physics. Do you think AI will help us unlock? There's been quite a bit of excitement throughout the history of physics of coming up with more and more general, simple laws that explain the nature of our reality. And then the ultimate of that would be a theory of everything that combines everything together. Do you think it's possible that, we humans, but perhaps AI systems will figure out a theory of physics that unifies all the laws of physics?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. I think it's very clear that we're going to see great boosts in science. We're already seeing a boost actually from machine learning helping science. AlphaFold was an example, decades old protein folding problem.
Focus your attack, soldiers.
Solved. And gradually, unless we go extinct by doing something dumb like we discussed, I think it's very likely that our understanding of physics will become so good that our technology will no longer be limited by human intelligence, but instead be limited by the laws of physics. So our tech today is limited by what we've been able to invent, right? I think as AI progresses, it'll just be limited by the speed of light and other physical limits, which will mean it's gonna be just dramatically beyond, where we are now.
Do you think it's a fundamentally mathematical pursuit of trying to understand the laws of this that govern our universe from a mathematical perspective? It's almost like if it's AI, it's exploring the space of like theorems and those kinds of things, or is there some other is there some other more computational ideas, more sort of empirical ideas?
They're both, I would say. It's really interesting to look out at the landscape of everything we call science today. So here you come now with this big new hammer. It says machine learning on it, and ask, where are there some nails that you can help with here that you can hammer? Ultimately, if machine learning gets to the point that it can do everything better than us, it will be able to help across the whole space of science. But maybe we can anchor it by starting a little bit right now near term and see how we kind of move forward. So like right now, first of all, you have a lot of big data science, right, where, for example, with telescopes, we are able to collect way more data every hour than a grad student can just pour over like in the old times, right? And machine learning is already being used very effectively, even at MIT, right, to find planets around other stars, to detect exciting new signatures of new particle physics in the sky, and to detect the ripples in the fabric of space-time that we call gravitational waves caused by enormous black holes crashing into each other halfway across the observable universe. Machine learning is running and ticking right now, doing all these things, and it's really helping all these experimental fields. There is a separate front of physics, computational physics, which is getting an enormous boost also. So we had to do all our computations by hand, right? People would have these giant books with tables of logarithms, and oh my god, it pains me to even think how long time it would have taken to do simple stuff. Then we started to get little calculators and computers that could just do some basic math for us. Now, what we're starting to see is kind of a shift from GoFi computational physics to neural network computational physics. What I mean by that is most computational physics would be done by humans programming in the intelligence of how to do the computation into the computer. Just as when Garry Kasparov got his posterior kicked by IBM's Deep Blue in chess, humans had programmed in exactly how to play chess.
Yes.
The intelligence came from the humans. It wasn't learned, right? Mu0 can beat not only Kasparov in chess, but also Stockfish, which is the best sort of GoFi chess program, by learning. And we're seeing more of that now. That shift beginning to happen in physics. So let me give you an example. So lattice QCD is an area of physics whose goal is basically to take the periodic table and just compute the whole thing from first principles. This is not a search for a theory of everything. We already know the theory that's supposed to produce as output the periodic table, which atoms are stable, how heavy they are, all that good stuff, their spectral lines. It's called, it's a theory, lattice QCD, you can put it on your t-shirt. Our colleague Frank Wilczek got the Nobel Prize for working on it. But the math is just too hard for us to solve. We have not been able to start equations and solve them to the extent that we can predict, oh yeah. And then there is carbon, and this is what the spectrum of the carbon atom looks like. But awesome people are building these supercomputer simulations where you just put in these equations and you make a big cubic lattice of space, or actually it's a very small lattice because you're going at the subatomic scale, down to the subatomic scale, and you try to solve this. But it's just so computationally expensive that we still haven't been able to calculate things as accurately as we measure them in many cases. And now machine learning is really revolutionizing this. So my colleague Fiona Shanahan at MIT, for example, she's been using this really cool machine learning technique called normalizing flows, where she's realized she can actually speed up the calculation dramatically by having the AI learn how to do things faster. Another area like this where we suck up an enormous amount of supercomputer time to do physics is black hole collisions. So now that we've done the sexy stuff of detecting a bunch of this with LIGO and other experiments, we want to be able to know what we're seeing. And so it's a very simple conceptual problem. It's the two-body problem. Newton solved it for classical gravity hundreds of years ago, but the two-body problem is still not fully solved
For black holes.
black hole for an Einstein's gravity, because they won't just orbit each other forever anymore. Two things: they give off gravitational waves, and eventually they crash into each other. And the game, what you want to do is you want to figure out, okay, what kind of wave comes out as a function of the masses of the two black holes, as a function of how they're spinning relative to each other, etc. And that is so hard. It can take months of supercomputer time on massive numbers of cores to do it, you know. Wouldn't it be great if you can use machine learning to greatly speed that up, right? Now you can use the expensive old GoFi calculation as the truth, and then see if machine learning can figure out a smarter, faster way of getting the right answer. Yet another area like physics. These are probably the big three that suck up the most computer time: lattice QCD, black hole collisions, and cosmological simulations, where you take not a subatomic thing and try to figure out the mass of the proton, but you take something that's enormous and try to look at how all the galaxies get formed in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
There again, there are a lot of very cool ideas right now about how you can use machine learning to do this stuff better. The difference between this and the big data is you kind of make the data yourself. Okay? And then finally, we're looking over the physics landscape and seeing what can we hammer with machine learning,
Yes.
right? So we talked about experimental data, big data, discovering cool stuff that we humans then look more closely at. Then we talked about taking the expensive computations we're doing now and figuring out how to do them much faster and better with AI. And finally, let's go really theoretical. So things like discovering equations, having deep fundamental insights. This is something closest to what I've been doing in my group. We talked earlier about the whole AI Feynman project, where if you just have some data, how do you automatically discover equations that seem to describe this well, that you can then go back as a human and work with and test and explore? And you asked a really good question also about if this is sort of a search problem in some sense. That's very deep, actually, what you said, because it is. Suppose I asked you to prove some mathematical theorem. What is a proof in math? It's just a long string of steps, logical steps that you can write out with symbols. And once you find it, it's very easy to write a program to check whether it's a valid proof or not. So why is it so hard to prove it then? Well, because there are ridiculously many possible candidate proofs you could write down, right? If the proof contains 10,000 symbols, even if there were only 10 options for each symbol to be, it's 10 to the power 1,000 possible proofs, which is way more than there are atoms in our universe, right? So you could say it's trivial to prove these things. You just write a computer, generate all strings, and then check, is this a valid proof? No. Is this a valid proof? No.
What a fool
And then
you are. You
just
cannot
keep doing this
kill
forever.
me.
But there are a lot of, but it is
eternal.
fundamentally a search problem. You just want to search the space of all strings of symbols, find one that is the proof, right?
Merkel,
And
Lord
there's a
of
whole
Bones.
area of machine learning
I am here.
called search.
I am
How do you
ready.
search through some giant space to find a
I
needle in the haystack?
Am
It's easier in
yours.
cases where there's a clear measure of good, like you're not just right or wrong, but this is better, this is worse, and maybe get hints of which direction to go in. That's why we talked about neural networks work so well.
I mean, that's such a human thing, of that moment of genius of figuring out the intuition of good, essentially. I mean, we thought that
Or is
was,
it?
maybe it's not, right? We thought that about chess, right? That
Exactly.
that the ability to see like 10, 15, sometimes 20 steps ahead was not a calculation that humans were performing. It was some kind of weird intuition about different patterns, about board positions, about the relative positions, and then somehow stitching stuff together. And a lot of it is just like intuition. But then you have like Alpha, there's Zero, was the first one that did self-play. It just came up with this. It was able to learn through self-play mechanism, this kind of intuition.
Exactly.
But just like you said, it's so fascinating to think they're in the space of totally new ideas. Can that be done?
know it can be done by neural networks because we did it with the neural networks in the craniums
That's
of the
right.
great mathematicians of our of humanity, right? And I'm so glad you brought up AlphaZero because that's the counterexample. It turned out we were flattering ourselves when we said intuition is something different. It's only humans can do it. It's not information processing. If it used to be that way, that again, it's really instructive, I think, to compare the chess computer Deep Blue that beat Kasparov with AlphaZero that beat Lisa Dahl at Go, because for Deep Blue, there was no intuition. There was some humans had programmed in some intuition. After humans had played a lot of games, they told the computer, count the pawn as 1 point, the bishop is 3 points, the rook is 5 points, and so on. You add it all up, and then you add some extra points for passed pawns, and subtract if the opponent has it, and blah, 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 blah. And then what Deep Blue did was just search. Just very brute force, tried many moves ahead, all these combinations, and a prune tree search, and it could think much faster than Kasparov, and it won, right? And that, I think, inflated our egos in a way it shouldn't have. Because people started to say, yeah, it's just brute force search, but it has no intuition. AlphaZero really popped our bubble there, because what AlphaZero does, yes, it does also do some of that tree search, but it also has this intuition module, which in geek speak is called a value function, where it just looks at the board and comes up with a number for how good is that position. The difference was no human told it how good the position is. It just learned it. And mu0 is the coolest or scariest of all, depending on your mood, because it's the same basic AI system will learn what the good board position is, regardless of whether it's chess or Go or Shogi or Pac-Man or Lady Pac-Man or Breakout or Space Invaders or any bunch of other games. You don't tell it anything, and it gets this intuition after a while for what's good. So this is very hopeful for science, I think, because if it can get intuition for what's a good position there, maybe it can also get intuition for what are some good directions to go if you're trying to prove something. I often, one of the most fun things in my science career is when I've been able to prove some theorem about something, and it's very heavily intuition guided, of course. I don't sit and try all random things. I have a hunch that, this reminds me a little bit about this other proof I've seen for this thing, so maybe what if I try this? Nah, that didn't work out, but this reminds me, actually, the way this failed reminds me of that. And so combining the intuition with all these brute force capabilities, I think it's going to be able to help physics too.
Do you think there'll be a day when an AI system, being the primary contributor, let's say 90% plus, wins the Nobel Prize in physics? Obviously, they'll give it to the humans because we humans don't like to give prizes to machines. It'll give it to the humans behind the system. You could argue that AI has already been involved in some Nobel Prizes, probably maybe something with black holes and stuff like that.
Yeah, we don't like giving prizes to other life forms. If someone wins a horse racing contest, they don't give the prize to the horse either.
That's true. But do you think we might be able to see something like that in our lifetimes when AI? So the first system I would say that makes us think about a Nobel Prize seriously is like AlphaFold. It's making us think about in medicine physiology a Nobel Prize, perhaps discoveries that are a direct result of something that's discovered by AlphaFold. Do you think in physics we might be able to see that in our lifetime?
I think what's probably going to happen is more of a blurring of the distinctions. So today, if somebody uses a computer to do a computation that gives them the Nobel Prize, nobody's going to dream of giving the prize to the computer. They're going to be like, that was just a tool. I think for these things also, people are just going to, for a long time, view the computer as a tool. But what's going to change is the ubiquity of machine learning. I think at some point in my lifetime, finding a human physicist who knows nothing about machine learning is going to be about almost as hard as it is today finding a human physicist who says, oh, I don't know anything about computers, or I don't use math. It would just be a ridiculous concept.
You see, but the thing is, there is a magic moment though, like with Alpha Zero, when the system surprises us in a way where the best people in the world truly learn something from the system in a way where you feel like it's another entity.
Yes.
Like the way people, the way Magnus Carlsen, the way certain people are looking at the work of Alpha Zero, it's like it truly is no longer a tool in the sense that it doesn't feel like a tool. It feels like some other entity. And so there's a magic difference, like where you're like, if an AI system is able to come up with an insight that surprises everybody in some like major way, that's a phase shift in our understanding of some particular science or some particular aspect of physics. I feel like that is no longer a tool, and then you can start to say that it perhaps deserves the prize. So for sure, the more important, the more fundamental transformation of the 21st century science is exactly what you're saying, which is probably everybody will be doing machine learning to some degree. Like if you want to be successful at unlocking the mysteries of science, you should be doing machine learning. But it's just exciting to think about, like, whether there'll be one that comes along that's super surprising and they'll make us question like who the real inventors are in this world.
Yeah, I think the question of isn't if it's going to happen, but when. But it's important. Also, in my mind, the time when that happens is also more or less the same time when we get artificial general intelligence.
Yes.
And then we have a lot bigger things to worry about than whether we get the Nobel Prize or not, right?
We pick our way
Because
toward our fates.
when you have
Unleashed.
machines that can outperform our best scientists at
You have my
science,
sword.
they can probably outperform
My
us
fealty.
at a lot of other stuff
Do what
as
you
well,
must. Then
which
we
can at a
fly this
minimum,
foul
make
place.
them incredibly powerful agents in the world, And I think it's a mistake to think we only have to start worrying about
Ketheric's netherstone.
loss of
It's in
control
his armor.
when machines get
Take
to
it.
AGI across the board, when they can do everything, all our job. Long before that, they'll be
In death,
hugely influential.
the body is
We
cool.
talked at length about how
Energy
the hacking of our
remarkable.
minds,
And now
with
the picture comes together. The absolute is neither God
algorithms
nor
trying to get us
man.
glued to our screens, right?
It
has
is the
already
elder brain
had a
you
big
saw.
impact on
Held here
society.
by
There was
those
an
three
incredibly
against
dumb
its will.
algorithm
A
in the grand scheme
temporary
of things,
reprieve.
right?
But
Just
welcome.
supervised machine learning.
With a brain on its
Yet
way
it
to
had
the city,
huge
its
impact.
influence here
So,
is
so
weakened.
I just don't want us
The
to be lulled
crown's
into a false
marking.
sense of security and think there
It
won't
is
be
a
any
crown
societal
of
impact
domination.
Yeah.
until things
The
reach
stones
human
were
level,
taken
because
from its
it's happening
crest.
already. And it's
They are
I was
never
thinking
the
the other week,
crown's Nethery's
you know,
magic must be the true
when I
source of,
see
and it
some
must be the reason
scaremonger
moved.
going, oh, the
crown
robots
can
are
do this
coming.
to the parasite.
The implication is
I
always
dare
that they're
not
coming to
imagine
kill
what
us.
it is doing to the brain.
And maybe you should have worried about that if you were in Nagorno-Karabakh during the recent war there. But
I know.
more
the
seriously,
other is a mystery to me. But the way she
the
spoke,
robots are coming
it is
right
most
now, but they're
likely
mainly
she
not
follows
coming to
Baal,
kill us. They're coming to
god
hack us.
of murder.
They're coming
Which
to hack
means
our minds. It's buying things
absolute
that
is a
maybe we
front
didn't
for the
need.
gods of death.
To vote for people who may
And
not
our
have our
enemies
best
are
interest in
chosen,
mind.
The dead three.
And it's kind of humbling, I think, actually,
They are
as a human
each
being,
but
to admit
working
that
together. I
turns
dare
out
not
that our minds are
imagine
actually
what they
much
might
more
achieve.
hackable than we thought. And the ultimate insult is that we are actually getting hacked by
We
machine
the
learning
army of the
algorithms that are in some
absolutism
objective
within
sense
the
much
city.
dumber than us.
An
you know?
elder brain.
But maybe we
brimming
shouldn't be so
with
surprised
power.
because,
Ready to turn everyone within its reach.
How do you feel about
the
cute
death gods
puppies?
chosen are on the cusp.
Love them.
We must
So,
rescue our child.
you would probably
I will
argue
be your
that
shield.
in
And-
some across-the-board measure, you're more intelligent than they are, but boy, are cute puppies good at hacking us, right?
Yeah.
They move into our house, persuade us to feed them, and do all these things. And what do they ever do for us?
Yeah.
Other than
Well-
being cute and making us feel good, right? So if puppies can hack us, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised if pretty dumb machine learning algorithms can hack us too.
Not to speak of cats, which is another level. And I think we should to counter your previous point about let us not think about evil creatures in this world. We can all agree that cats are as close to objective evil as we can get. But that's just me saying that. Okay, so
Have you seen the cartoon? I think it's maybe The Onion.